Hey, so I had a student ask me last week, how can we believe God exists based on just some really ancient book? Where's the evidence from our modern day life? So here's what I initially thought of. So just unpacking these a bit more, the first one we've got here is a very famous Marian apparition at Fatima. And on the last apparition of the three children, 70,000 people saw the miracle of the sun that science couldn't explain. And now we've got a modern-day Fatima here called Medjugorje in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which Mary's been appearing for the last 40 years, since the 1980s, and a lot of miracles have taken place there, including my uncle, who was in a wheelchair once but now can walk because of Medjugorje. Another proof of existence is Lourdes in France, where again Mary's came and appeared to someone. This time it was a little girl called Bernadette Soubirous, and she was told to dig into the ground, and a miraculous spring of water came up, and it's still flowing these days. A lot of miraculous cures have occurred over the years. Well worth Googling, Lourdes in France. As Catholics, we believe that we receive Jesus' body, blood, soul and divinity in the Eucharist. So lots of Eucharistic miracles have happened over the years, particularly this one at Luciano in Italy, where the host, the communion host, has literally turned into blood and body under scientific testing, which is a bit freaky but cool. Another bit of evidence, in my opinion, are the incorruptible bodies of many saints. Here's St. Bernadette Soubirous of Lourdes from the story I mentioned before, St. Charles Cézanne. Basically, incorruptible bodies mean that bodies don't rot away like most do after we die. They stay intact. Here's Blessed Carlo Acutis, who's on his way, hopefully in a few years' time, to become a saint. He's buried in his tracksuit, which is pretty cool. And one of my favourite saints, St. Padre Pio, his body can be seen in his sanctuary at San Giovanni Rotondo, where he lived for most of his life, which is a good segue to the mystics. Padre Pio suffered what's called the stigmata, which basically means he bore the wounds that Christ suffered on the cross from the nails through his hands. He was also able to read souls, so if you went to confession to him, he would tell you which sins you forgot to tell. And he could bilocate too, which is cool, be in two places at one time. Marie-Julie Jahenny, a French mystic from the 1800s and 1900s, is said to have had many apparitions from Jesus, Mary, St. Michael the Archangel, and lots of saints. And from these, she's been able to prophesy World War I, World War II, the election of particular popes. And some of the stuff she's prophesied and hasn't come true yet is pretty much happening as we live these days, particularly the war in Israel that started last year, which happened after the death of a long-reigning English monarch, which would have been Queen Elizabeth II. Another good bit of evidence of God's influence in the world can be seen through the Garabandal apparitions of the 1960s. That's well worth researching if you get a chance, as some of the stuff mentioned there I think is about to happen. Another mystic which is starting to become very popular in our times is the servant of God, Luisa Piccarreta, who's being investigated for sainthood as well because of her apparitions and her book to do with the divine will, pretty much the Our Father prayer being lived out. And when we think of God and his signs, miracles are often linked with these, and Saint Charbel, a saint from Lebanon, I think, has been linked to tens of thousands of miraculous cures over the last couple of decades, so he's well worth researching too. Another sign of God, in my opinion, is the amount of times holy statues, particularly Marian statues, have been crying holy oil tears. There's a very famous statue, the Statue of Akita in Japan, and often this oil is collected, the tears, and it has miraculous healing cures occurring when people use it. Here's a recent one from Samoa, where lots of different statues have been weeping tears, and the tears are being collected. And this one's an oldie but a goodie, Our Lady of Guadalupe. You've got to look up that story. It's a really cool miracle that happened in Mexico. Yeah, probably 500 years ago, but I've been remembering it recently because of Cardinal Burke's novena that he wants us to pray this year. And forgive me if I say this one wrong, but you need to look up the story of Our Lady of Las Lajas in Colombia. And this cool looking artwork's not actually a painting. It's basically in the rock. People have chiseled like nearly a foot deep and they can still see the image. And there's a really cool story associated with it, so look it up. And as with many very popular Marian apparitions, they've built a really cool basilica at the place where it happened. Last year in 2023, when the Maui fires were ripping through Hawaii, a church that recently put up the Divine Mercy image was miraculously saved when the rest of the neighbourhood was burnt everywhere. This made me think back to St. Paul's Chapel in New York back in 2001 when the September 11 attacks happened and the World Trade Centers came tumbling down and all the buildings around were damaged, but St. Paul's was pretty much left intact. This also makes me think of the church and the priests that survived the Hiroshima atomic blast back at the end of World War II, along with the cathedral in Nagasaki, which survived somehow a atomic blast as well. Don't get me started on relics either. Relics are awesome. They're another video in themselves, what I can do. John chapter 20 relates to this quite well. Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen Jesus." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them, though the doors were locked. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." So it makes sense that we have a lot of doubting Thomases in our world these days, in the information age that we live in, when everything can just be accessed at the tip of your fingers on the internet, on your phones. Yes, I can definitely understand why we have a lot of doubting Thomases these days in the information age that we now live in. Yet somehow we have to rise above that and walk by faith and not by sight. Try to rise above being a doubting Thomas and be strong in the Lord. A good way to do this, just saying, and Mary's pretty much said it in nearly all the apparitions the last couple 100 years, is pray the rosary. God bless.